It's Thanksgiving week. How many of you are ready to take a deep breath and jump into the extended family fun? Okay, 1. Thank you. Thank you, Cammie. 2. How many of you are ready to chuck the turkey in the toilet and eat pumpkin pie straight out of the tin? A few more. Okay, this talk is for you. This talk is for you. Listen, y'all, Reverend Shannon and I usually plan out our talk titles months in advance, just so you know. Months ago, when I was thinking about this talk, I did a simple math equation. Thanksgiving equals gratitude. So my talk title today is Showing Up Grateful. Showing Up Grateful, right? Sounds like an awesome plan 3 months ago, doesn't it, Darcy Bradley? I don't know about you, but gratitude hasn't been super accessible to me on the emotional roller coaster that I have found myself on lately. Gratitude has felt like work, and in some ways, in many ways, gratitude has felt like bypass. Like I was asking myself to put all of the complicated things to one side and just focus on feeling grateful. And this never feels right. Bypass never feels right. If you've been around here for a minute, then you know that I get a little itchy when I hear the phrase, "It's all good because it's all God." Here's the deal. That is actually a true and very big and important metaphysical principle. It is all good because it's all God. But here's where it gets sticky. If the suffragettes had just sat around 125 years ago and said, "It's all good, God's in the vote," I would not be a voting member of society. If Rosa Parks 75 years ago had not had the courage to stand, if instead she had just sat and said, "It's all good, it's all God," 75 years, we would be even farther behind in our walk towards justice, right? We can sometimes all good, all God ourselves right into a sense of complacency. And what this does is it gives us this really neat and tidy bypass of the work that needs to be done. So what can we do? If we can't all good, all God ourselves into knowing the truth, what can we do? We know it's unhealthy to sit and stew in toxicity. I have no desire to do that either. And there is a lot about this life right now that is feeling toxic to me, to people I love, and to people that I don't even know, and yet I love fiercely. So we don't want to stew in it, but we also don't want to bypass the work. So where does that leave us? I've been thinking a lot this week about a phrase that Reverend Shannon taught me years ago, and you've heard us say this: my work, your work, God's work. My work, your work, God's work. So what does that mean? My work is the stuff that I have responsibility for, the stuff that I have agency over in my life. Your work is the stuff that you have responsibility for. God's work is everything else. In order to stay in my lane and actually do my work, I have to have a spiritual maturity and a discernment to know the difference between my work, your work, and God's work. So my work, my body, my feelings, my energy, my attitudes, my behaviors, my choices, my work. Your work, your body, your feelings, your energy, your choices, your attitudes, your behaviors, your work. God's work. Everything else. Everything else. My work. Everything that I can do within the scope of my reach to help make the world a better place. Your work. Everything that you can do within the scope of your reach to help make the world a better place. God's work? Now, as a recovering perfectionist, codependent woman, I'm sure I'm the only one in the room. I used to have a really hard time sometimes knowing where my work ends and where others begins. The phrase, just let me do it so I know it's done right, just about killed me. And my husband. And frankly, I had an even harder time trusting that God was holding up its end of the bargain. I was really incredibly grateful for Reverend Shannon's talk last week about the sacred work of setting healthy boundaries. Oh, it was so good. It was so good. She told us that it's not only okay, but it is imperative that when we have created a really healthy and beautiful space in our lives, to stop the person who comes in the door, I loved the metaphor, the crock pot full of mud, to stop the person at the door with the crock pot full of mud who has come to throw mud on your beautiful life, it's important to stop them in a loving and healthy way and say, no, we're not going to have that here. You know, in the past, I would see that person at the door with that crock pot of mud, and the first thing I would do is I would try to take it from them and clean that crock pot for them. The next thing I would do is I would try to fix them into thinking that they don't need that crock pot full of mud. The next thing that I would do is I would watch them throw the crock pot of mud all over my beautiful, healthy space, and then I would help them clean it up while doing my forgiveness work. You know what that made me? No, not stupid. It made me resentful. It made me resentful. And you know who it hurt? In all of the work that we do to love one another, and it is the most important work that we do, it is imperative that we place ourselves in that circle of love that we are providing for the people around us. The things that I was doing, those codependent activities that I was engaged in, I was leaving myself outside of the circle of love. That's what healthy boundaries do. They include you in that circle of love. So we ask ourselves, is this my task? Is this my work? Is it your work or is it God's work? That's the first question. And then if it is my work, do I have healthy boundaries in it? Thank you, Reverend Shannon O'Hurley. And am I including myself in the circle of love that I'm holding for others? Setting healthy boundaries is an ultimate action of love. So, about the upcoming holidays. First, just a gentle reminder, they're actually the holy days. And your life is sacred ground. Your life is sacred ground. So we're going to talk about two mindsets that will serve us as we walk into these holy days. The first one is just what we were just talking about, including ourselves in the circle of love. If you have some difficult events coming up, and they may not even be related to the holidays, it might just be work tomorrow. If you have difficult events coming up, how can you hold yourself in your circle of love? How can you honor your needs while moving through the spaces that you are moving through? I was thinking about if you have a tricky situation that you're navigating on Thursday, treat yourself to a movie on Friday. Make sure that the energy that you're extending is returning to you and that you're receiving it. If you have to step out in courage on Thursday and shut down the racist uncle, then stop afterwards. Give yourself some kudos for your courage and your truth telling, and then go ask your favorite cousin for a hug. Be willing to engage in the things that you need to do to receive the grace and the good that you are extending to others. Include yourself in the circle of love. It's an important mindset as we begin to move through these holy days. There was a second mindset that came to me this week. A few nights ago, I got home at about 5 o'clock. I'd had a really long, difficult day. And Michael had dinner in the oven, and I was teaching class that night. And it's 5 o'clock. I had 30 minutes to shove some food in my mouth and brush my teeth and change my clothes and hit the road, and the lights go out. So what's the first thing you do when the lights go out is you go to the very dark mud room, this little space between the garage and the house that has no windows, and the lights are out. So what's the first thing you do? You go to turn on the light, because it's what you have always done. When you're in the dark, you go to turn on the light. Guess what happened when Michael went to turn on the light? Nothing. Maybe we should keep our flashlights somewhere else. That's not so dark. But it got me thinking about so the next 30 minutes was a comedy of errors. We laughed together. He pulled the semi-warm dinner out of the oven. I ate around the edges while Alex is over there in his wheelchair, and he turns on the headlights on his wheelchair, and he keeps pointing the way for us. I finally, I shove some food in my mouth. I go upstairs. I brush my teeth in the dark. I don't even try to change clothes. I realized after class, I looked down, there's like toothpaste, from the Sonicare. And all the while, I kept reaching over to that damn wall and trying to turn on the light the whole time. And it just made me think about how sometimes our habits of thinking stop serving us. They might work all the rest of the time. But when we're walking through the dark, sometimes we have to think about it. We have to be conscious to what's happening so that we can make different choices. What Michael and I had to do that night is we had to work harder to find the light. And that's a hell of a metaphor right now, isn't it? The second mindset that's going to serve you in the coming days and weeks is to actively look for the light. Don't assume that old habits and ingrained ways of being are going to serve you or the world at this time. And if you find yourself bumping around in the dark, actively look for the light. Actively look for the light. When we can engage in really consciously engage in working in creating these healthy mindsets for ourselves, what we do is we create a space for God. We create a space for love to work in our lives and through our lives for the world. And the really funny thing is, these two mindsets of including ourselves in the circle of love and actively looking for the light, they have a byproduct that automatically happens. Because we begin to approach life with curiosity. And the natural byproduct of curiosity is gratitude. It's gratitude. So all of the time when gratitude was looking like work to me, when it was too hard, when it was too bypassy, it was because I had some work to do to change my mindset so that I could then be in authentic gratitude. I am not a person, and science does not agree with me on this. I'll just tell you right now, so you can ignore the next 30 seconds. But I am not a person who is going to, who's going to, gratitude doesn't get me anywhere. I get somewhere and I experience gratitude. And if you are in the same boat, if you, like me, are not going to sit with your gratitude journal in the ad nauseum, I'm grateful for my house, I'm grateful for my car, I'm grateful for these kids. It does nothing for me. Nothing at all. And if you have it works for some people. For some of you, you see those words down in writing and it changes something in you. You're like, oh yeah, that's my beautiful life. So if it works for you, that is phenomenal. Keep at it. It's wonderful for you. We are all different, and I am unique and different, and it does not work for me. For me, there is a requirement of curiosity to it all. So sometimes we can just show up grateful. Some of you might be really looking forward to this week. Helen and Cammie are really looking forward to this week. I'm glad that the two of you are really looking forward to this week. That's wonderful. Sometimes it is our duty to engage in our work of actively loving ourselves and each other, setting those healthy boundaries, putting our old habits aside and looking for the good in the world, and then we experience gratitude. We don't make it happen. It happens as a result of the work we're doing. However way it works for you, do that. Because what science does show us is that gratitude changes you. It changes you physically, it changes you emotionally, and it changes you mentally. So do the work. Do the work. Jay Shetty, who's the host of the podcast On Purpose. This is a great podcast, by the way. Y'all are always looking for podcast recommendations. On Purpose is a great podcast. He said, there are so many things in the world that could be invisible to the material eye. And when you take a moment to stop, to pause, to be present, and notice them, that's gratitude. Take a moment to stop, to pause, to notice it. That's gratitude. I happened on something this week that helped me to be present to those moments, and it was written by a young mom, and I couldn't figure out what her name is from her social, so here are her words. She said, I happened on something she said, when I was a fresh mom with 2 under 3, bless her heart, my card got declined in the checkout line. The baby was in the car seat. The 2-year-old was asking for bubble gum and chocolate bars, and I felt like I could just melt into the floor. Without missing a beat, the man behind me in line handed the cashier his card. I've got it, he said. That was 10 years ago, and I will never forget it. I have been on both the giving and receiving end of that story. She goes on to say, one time in the Target line, a mom with a brand new infant and 2 littles who were crying and clinging to her legs asked if I might hold her baby for a minute. I took that baby and rocked her in my arms until she stopped fussing. I bet that mom remembers that day. I know I do. I have been on the giving and receiving end of that act of gratitude. She said, when my toddler was somewhere between 3-nager and 4-NATO, 3-nader and 4-NATO. 3-nager. She threw a giant tantrum in a shopping center. I held her on a park bench while she screamed like I was her abductor. A couple of older ladies stopped and said, you're doing an amazing job, Mama. Hang in there. I will never, ever forget them or their words that day. One more, in a train depot in France, we were lost and confused, trying to figure out where to go. An older man sitting near us accidentally dropped some cash on the ground. My daughter, who was 6, found it and returned it to him. He and his friend loaded us up with snacks from their bags and then in broken English asked if we needed help. They ended up walking us all the way to our next train and riding it with us for a way just to make sure we didn't get lost. Boy, you won't ever forget those 2 men. Kindness is powerful. It can be such a little thing. But these little things that we do can last for a lifetime. These little things that we can do bring us to hope. I bet you have a lot of similar stories. I bet that you have been on the giving and receiving end of these kinds of simple kindness. This is how we extend our circle of love, by being the light for someone else. And it can be as simple as a word for someone who's struggling. You know, one of the beautiful things about community is that each of us take time as the giver and the receiver. Each of us have times in our lives that are more difficult and more painful. This is the cycle of life. There is nothing wrong with it. But the gift of chosen family, the gift of community, for some of you, you have family of origin that does that too. Oh, how wonderful for you, and I celebrate that. Some of us created that family for ourselves. That place where you can lean in when it's too hard, and when others can lean into you when it's your turn to be strong. This is a place where it's safe to do that. This is a place where it's safe to walk in the door and fall in someone's arms and cry because it's that hard for you right now. This is also the place where you get to be those loving and supportive arms. If I can invite you to do one thing this week as you're going about these holy days, in addition to these mindsets that we've talked about, give some thought to your community. Is there something you can do? Is there something you can be? Is there a phone call you can make that strengthens that emotional safety net for you? Because that's what it is. It's a safety net. I was on our little town here, Lake Oswego. We have a Facebook group, and someone on the Facebook group said, hey, I just moved here from New York, and in New York, you know, in my neighborhood, everybody knew each other. If you needed milk, you just went next door and asked for milk. And if you needed a ride to the mechanic, you knew who to ask for the mechanic. She goes, where are those structures here? And I'm thinking, oh, honey. We are a pull them up by our bootstraps and get on kind of people here on the West Coast sometimes. We don't always do a good job of building those inner structures of community. It takes time, and it takes caring for each other. And I just want to invite you to care for yourself and build that community. So whether it's your time to give or to receive, whether you are extending your circle of love or receiving the grace of someone else's kindness, take the time, as Jay Shetty said, to stop, to pause, to be present, and to notice the good that is happening, the good that you're doing, and the good that you are receiving. Because what is another word for good? God. When you are present to the good, you are present to divine love itself. And when you do those acts of kindness, you are literally the hands of God on this planet. When you look for the light, you become the light. And this is how we help make the world a better place for ourselves and for each other.